Welcome to Pagan Perspective. I'm Tara, your Tuesday Subsweek host, and this week's topic is about what led us to our paths and other such personal stories. Since this is a 2-week long topic, I'm sure you've heard the questions enough times by now that I don't have to read them off, but I will include them in the description bar below if you would like to have a look. It's kind of interesting that this topic comes up right now because a lot of people lately have been asking me, what led me to paganism or the path I'm on now. And even though usually I don't have any problem telling those kinds of stories, for some reason I've been really stumbling over this one. And I keep thinking I really need to come up with a better version of this story so that I can tell people when they ask these sorts of questions. And here we are, here's my opportunity to try again. For me, there is really no part of my life or myself that is excluded from what draws me to paganism. All of the things that I've ever been drawn to or fascinated by exist within paganism, or at least can be applied to it beautifully. Every single thing in my life, every influence on me has led me to where I am now. And so it's really difficult for me to just pick out a few things that are most significant as far as what led me here, because everything seems significant. From growing up in the mountains and running around in the woods as a child, to the books I read and the movies I watched, all of these things seem significant. But I guess really the fact that every detail of myself and my life and my interests seem to fit so well with paganism is really how I know that it's the right path for me. So I guess that's really my first answer to the question of how I know this is the right path for me. The second part of my answer is that I know this is the right path for me because it fills me with awe and wonder. It continually inspires me and helps me to grow and improve myself. It gives me all sorts of powerful, profound feelings and experiences. And it teaches me so much. Basically, I know it's right for me because I love it. I find it fun and exciting and stimulating, and there's always new things to explore and work on. And I think if anything makes you feel that way, if you're passionate about it and get a lot out of it, then that's how you know that it's right for you. I've been attracted to paganism pretty much my whole life. I even did some pagan-like rituals when I was younger just because I felt drawn to do it. But I guess the real story is how I got from my upbringing to the point of actively calling myself a pagan. My parents are Mormon, and we went to church until I was about 6, at which point they decided to stop going, and I don't think that I've set foot in a Mormon church since. I hated going to church when I was a kid, mostly because it meant I was forced to wear some horrible dress. I was never baptized because my mother doesn't believe in baptizing babies. She believes that if we're going to be baptized, we should do it at an age where we are old enough to make the decision for ourselves. My parents are really private about their beliefs and their religion. They don't really talk about it much. I don't know if I can say that I was raised Christian. I was more raised around Christianity. The extent of my religious upbringing was pretty much just prayer before dinner. I didn't even know that Easter was a Christian holiday until I was 14. I knew the pagan origins of Easter before I ever knew about anything with Jesus and a cave. So I didn't know a lot about Christianity or Bible stories, but I was raised to pray to the Christian God and believe in an afterlife. When I was somewhere between 7 and 9, I really started to think about and question things. One day I heard my mom talking to one of her friends on the phone, and she was talking about why she didn't believe in the devil or in hell. And this really got me thinking. So before I went to sleep every night for a series of nights, I would lay in bed and stare up at the glowy stars on my ceiling, thinking about these sorts of big questions. It started with me thinking about whether I believed in hell or the devil, but then it proceeded into thinking about all the things that had ever been taught or overheard. And thinking about some of the contradictions that existed between those things, thinking about what made sense to me, and then eventually thinking about whether I believed in any of them. By the end of this series of nights, I basically became agnostic. Though, of course, in the waspy mountain community that I grew up in, I'd never even heard of agnosticism. I experimented at one point by praying to a goddess instead of a god, but that really didn't work for me. In retrospect, I don't find this that surprising because that idea of an overarching goddess figure still doesn't really work for me. I much prefer specific polytheistic goddesses. So yeah, from that point on, I was agnostic, and I was agnostic for a really, really long time. I don't entirely know where this idea comes from, but a lot of Mormons that I knew would talk about this idea, that knowledge and wisdom were like a puzzle, and every religion had a piece of the puzzle. And perhaps it was this idea, combined with the vague hope that I would find a religion that fit with what I believed, that sent me searching and learning about as many religions as I possibly could when I was a teenager. There was this website online that had information about as many of the world's religions and denominations as possible, And it was always told from the perspective of people who actually followed these religions. And there were these articles clearing up misconceptions and explaining interesting details. I was kind of obsessed with this website when I was a teenager. I read just about everything on it. I was continually hearing these stories about how other people were reading about all these different religions, and then they found one that just fit perfectly with everything that they already believed. And it just clicked, and the more they read about it, the more they knew it was the one for them, and then happy ending, la-di-la. And I kept reading about all these different religions, hoping, I think, deep down, that I would find one that fit perfectly with everything that I believed, but that never happened for me, and I don't think that it ever will. There were religions that I was attracted to that I found fascinating, but when I looked at all of the beliefs of them, there was always only bits of them that really worked for me. And I think that's one of the main reasons it took me so long to really consider myself a pagan, despite being attracted to it for so long. Because it took me a long time to realize that I could be this without all of my beliefs necessarily matching up with everyone else's. And there's that whole debate between orthodoxy and orthopraxy, and how paganism is based on orthopraxy, not orthodoxy. And I'm sure everyone's completely sick of it by now, but I really enjoy it, partially just because it makes me realize that there are other ways of relating to people and being part of something than just having all of your beliefs match up. It's not that I think there's anything wrong with finding a religion that perfectly fits your beliefs. I think that's great. But that doesn't necessarily happen for all of us. And I think sometimes it can even be a little bit of an illusion. I'm sure there's plenty of people within the pagan community who came into it based on some list of beliefs that they saw that matched up perfectly with theirs, only to find that so many people within the pagan community don't believe those things, and then probably being very confused. When it comes down to it, our beliefs are very personal and they're all different. So I basically continued being agnostic and interested in religion, but not part of any religion for a long time. I thought for a long time that I didn't have enough faith or arrogance to be either an atheist or a theist. And I think it's because I kept seeing these extremes of, on the one hand, monotheists being like, I don't just believe God exists, I know God exists. And on the other hand, atheists being like, I know that God doesn't exist. And my thoughts were always, there is no way of knowing, and I can't believe in something without having any reason to either way. When I was an undergrad, and even in high school, there was a lot of time spent going over arguments for and against the existence of God, or gods, really. And after all of this time going over these arguments and discussing them in class, I did develop a leaning. So it got to the point where I was an agnostic, leaning in an atheistic direction. Senior year of undergrad, I was talked into taking some more religious studies classes because I was told that the teacher and the readings were just so good. One of the classes was called Faith and Doubt, and it was an extremely good class. I'm glad that I was talked into taking it. And at some point I told someone that I was agnostic, and they gave me this disappointed look like being agnostic lacked gumption or something. And I was so confused and surprised by it that it really got me thinking about what I'd learned over the past year about knowledge and belief and faith and doubt. And it made me realize that while there's no way of knowing for sure either way, I had developed a belief about what I believed was probably true, and that there wasn't so much wrong with this as I had previously believed. And that's when I started to consider myself an atheist. In all these classes that I was taking senior year, I also developed a much more complicated understanding of what religion is. And after a lot of time of reading and changing my ideas about a lot of things, it made me realize that atheist religion could actually make sense. Some of the reading also inspired me in ways in which deities could be still interesting and meaningful without necessarily being literal separate entities. If I were going to pick out three of probably the biggest influences in helping me to develop these ideas, it would probably be an intellectual cocktail of Bonhoeffer, Nietzsche, and Feuerbach. And I think that's the point at which I started to realize that I could be both a pagan and an atheist. From the point at which I decided that that was something I really wanted to explore, I spent a lot of time reading and researching and learning as much as I could. I wouldn't call it a year and a day, and it was definitely longer than a year and a day. That process of learning and changing and developing and exploring is really something that I hope is going to continue for the rest of my life. But it was probably about 2 or 3 years before I felt comfortable actively participating in the community and calling myself a pagan openly. I do work with deities, but I haven't dedicated myself to one particular patron deity or anything like that. And I also don't really do the whole one god, one goddess thing. To me, it's just like relationships. There's probably a few who will be the closest and most long-lasting, and then there's others that might be more transient. Each relationship is different. I get different things out of different ones. In my practice, I work with 3 different cultures and pantheons, which are the Celtic, the Norse, and the Ancient Greek. I'm not going to go into depth about the gods and goddesses that I've worked with. Maybe I'll be able to do that another time. But I'll use a few as an example. The god that I've worked with the longest is Eros. Ever since Plato's Symposium, in which he talks about the ascent of Eros, Eros has been an extremely important concept in some circles of philosophy. and it became an important concept to me through philosophy. In my master's, I took classes and wrote papers specifically dedicated to this concept, and through that it's become, and I think always will be, an incredibly important concept to me personally. Since this concept is so deeply important to me, I became interested in working with the personification of this concept, which is the god Eros. I'd spent a lot of time researching and working on how I wanted to work with the gods and how I was going to make that fit with my beliefs. And so I came to a point at which I wanted to try it out. And the first god that I tried that with was Eros. I wasn't expecting too much from it. I was just sort of putting an offering out there, opening myself up to an experience and potential relationship. I thought I would have to focus a lot to really have some sort of effective experience from it, but I was surprised to find that there was a very strong and immediate response. It was an extremely, extremely powerful experience, which I will probably never forget. If I've learned anything in general from my relationships with deities, it's to be open and flexible, make the best of whatever comes your way, and expect the unexpected. So I'm pretty sure that Eros is a god that I will probably have a long-term working relationship with. And I know this because everything he represents is extremely important to me and always will be, and because I've had such powerful and successful experiences with him as a god. One god that I'm currently working with is the Celtic god Manannán, who I discovered through reading about Celtic Reconstructionism. I read some descriptions of him and I was just immediately struck and infatuated. The more I read about him, the more I love him. The images that are associated with him are so powerful and incredible. I love the things he's associated with, and I love the descriptions and the stories surrounding him. And I'm sure that in future reading about him, I will find much that is inspiring, powerfully symbolic, and extremely entertaining. Mostly I feel like he's a god that I want to work with in the long term, just because I feel so strongly about him. I love him so much. So that's how I know. I just love him. My third example is a god that I have not worked with yet, but plan on working with in the future, and that is Odin. There's a lot about Odin that I find interesting and inspiring. Odin is a god that I've been continually attracted to for a long time, but I kept kind of being in denial about it and dismissing it, and I've finally come around to embracing it and realizing that there is something deep to be explored there. Odin is another god that gives me very overwhelming, intense, and profound feelings. Even though I haven't begun working with him yet, I already feel like there's an emotional connection there. Something about Odin just strikes me like this deep, vibrating voice in the fiber of my being. It's awe-inspiring and impressive. But personally, the feeling that I've gotten off of Odin is that I need to do some hardcore studying and learn some more before I start a working relationship with him. So yeah, that's just the example of 3 male gods that I've been really drawn to lately. And as much as I'd love to go on and go into more detail, I should probably wrap this up. I'll probably go into more depth and tell some stories and explain some of my beliefs and practice on my personal channel at some point. So if you're curious about any of that, then you're welcome to subscribe or send me a message or comment below. So thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope things are going wonderfully for all of you. I don't even know what that was.